Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Gov Comms Collective. I'm Hannah Elizabeth, your host, and I'm here with my part time co host and full time husband, Daniel.
Thank you for having me. Hi, everyone. Yes, I'm excited about this journey. And, you've been in this field for a while now, but I'm sure some of the listeners might not know your background and what led you to this point right now. So please share.
Yeah, so I'll start back in my childhood because that's really where all of this started. My dad worked with Customs and Border Protection his entire career. Yes, all like 50 years of his career, he was with the same agency, which is mind blowing to me. But that being said, we grew up with a lot of his colleagues, and every year I remember going to a picnic with all the customs people and just being around law enforcement and visiting his office and take your child to work day and all that. That's where my interest for working for the government really started to blossom. And so when I was in school, during my undergrad degree, I actually had the opportunity to work with the United States Coast Guard in their public affairs office in D7. So shout out to you guys in Miami. Thank you so much for the opportunity. But that's really where I knew that, yes, this is where I belong. I belong working for the government in some shape, some form. And then I actually landed my first job, full time job, about 8 months out of college, where I worked in house as the public outreach officer with the Broward Metropolitan Planning Organization, so a transportation agency in Broward County. Worked there for about 3 years, and then I moved on and worked in house with a boutique PR firm, Conceptual Communications, where we served public agencies. So there was a lot of South Florida communities that we had the honor to work with, and that was just such an incredible experience. And now I'm the strategic communications coordinator with HDR, which is an engineering firm out in Salt Lake City. So made the move halfway across the country to start this new chapter. And now our office specifically works on major transportation projects within the Salt Lake community. So it's just been such a fun journey and working with all different agencies and all different kinds of people. And it's just been so transformative and everything that I've hoped and dreamed and all those good things.
Amazing. Yes. And why a podcast and why now?
So I think the biggest thing that I've learned over the years is, as you mentioned, I've been in the field for about 6 years. But my entire time in undergrad, nobody talked about the specific challenges that government agencies face when it comes to communications and PR. Same thing when I went through my grad program, which that was a great experience and it was so much fun applying what I've learned. But again, nobody talked about the specific challenges that government communicators face. And although there are trainings out there and there's plenty of like really, really solid ones, it can be hard to get that funding to go to those trainings and to learn and to build that network of other government communicators. So I want to use this podcast as a platform to really talk about what it's like to be a gov communicator for those who are interested in entering the field or, those communication veterans who have been serving communities for the past 20, 30, 40 years. I really just want to have this as a resource for anybody who has these questions and don't know where to go or need some guidance on something that they're facing that they don't know anybody who's gone through it.
I'm excited for this journey. And I think the listeners would love to know how frequently are you planning to put out episodes and things of that nature when it comes to the format and the frequency of this podcast.
Yeah, so I'm hoping every other week, so 2 or 3 times a month, depending how the weeks are laid out. I am still working full time and I have all of the things that I'm still trying to experience in Salt Lake. So the idea is to have it bi-weekly and we'll have guests from previous organizations that I've worked with, different connections that I've made through the Public Relations Society of America, any of our listeners who are interested in speaking and sharing their experience. I really just want to make this very community focused and build that network of gov communicators and really just share the wealth because as we know it's so hard to find some of this information and like we can feel like we're alone wearing all of the hats. So
Okay, awesome. So sounds like this is going to be a fairly regular podcast, and I'm excited to not only be a part of this journey with you, but also learn from you because I have been learning every day. Well, I think the listeners would love to know a little bit more about the different topics that we'll be discussing in this podcast with some examples and things that you can further elaborate on.
yeah, definitely. So throughout the series, again, we'll be touching on all the different challenges that we face as communicators. So things like crisis communications, lack of funding or budget restraints for different training or conferences, opportunities for professional development and the importance of being involved in different organizations like the Public Relations Society of America, dealing with different personalities at work or your clients or your partners, digital equity, federal legislation that's impacting the work that we do, and so much more.
Well, for those who don't know, we did live in Florida for some time, and you recently talked about the Go Canes. You recently talked about the hurricane that devastated parts of Florida. So we'll be covering certain topics like that, current events.
Yeah, definitely. And I'm really glad that you brought up the hurricane. As many of the listeners know, Hurricane Helene didn't just affect Florida, it was all over the East Coast, and especially communities like those in Western North Carolina that really got slammed and they just weren't ready for it. They didn't have the infrastructure for it. But I think it's important, especially with the digital equity component, to talk about accessibility to communications. And that doesn't always mean accessibility in the way that we think for those who are blind or deaf or hard of hearing or limited sight or one of the many other disabilities that fall under that, but truly making communications available to everybody in the community and reducing as many barriers as we can, as seen with the hurricane that just hit and with several other natural disasters that have hit the country in the last couple of years. Access to communication is imperative for recovery efforts and for getting in touch with loved ones to make sure they're okay. And I think it's just so important that we focus on the importance of removing barriers. So making sure that communications are in the languages that the communities are speaking. It might not always be English, especially as we grew up in South Florida. Spanish and Creole and Portuguese are all very prevalent in the communities that we serve down there. And I think it's important that communicators realize that and understand the demographics of their communities before natural disasters like these hit. Not only that, but making sure that communications aren't just over the internet or over social media, making sure that, there's printed materials and things in print media, because North Carolina was without communication, like online communication, for about a week. And journalists were really struggling to reach out to those communities. And a lot of people just didn't know what was going on because phone lines were down, internet access was very hard to come by, or power lines were down, or whatever it might be. So thinking through all the different elements of how we get communication and important information to each other. So thinking, where are these communities spending their time before a hurricane or before, a natural disaster? Have things at a library or a community center, connect with local HOAs and local city governments, and make sure that all of your residents have access to that communication in whatever way it is that they already spend their time. So if they're already going in those community centers, have that information there. If, you realize that a lot of them are using social media to get their information, make sure that your pages are up to date, and same with your website. Thanks for letting me go down that little tangent. Digital accessibility is something that I'm really passionate about. So I will definitely be going further in depth in future episodes.
So I'd love to know any final words you want to leave the audience with?
Yeah, of course. I just want to say thank you to you again for just being my biggest supporter in all of this, and always just being that extra push that I need to follow my dreams. So thank you. And then a special thank you to Jen, Lori, and Abby for agreeing to be guests on this podcast before I even launched it. So again, just thank you so much. And thank you to the community and everyone in the audience for tuning in and communicating and doing your best to help strengthen our communities.